Hello there, I'm Mamakato, and if you're watching this, there's a decent chance you saw my video on the FNaF 4 box where I said, I have a possible future theory swimming around in my head that might involve the toy animatronics, or at least some previous version of them, existing earlier than we initially anticipated. This is that theory. Obviously, we know that hint was designed to point out that these toys look like the FNaF 2 characters instead of the FNaF 1 models. But why? What does this reveal about the story? Many people theorize that it's meant to convey that the toy animatronic designs are literally based on the toys. But that's never sat right with me. Phone Guy doesn't refer to them as the toy animatronics at any point, and their being based on the toys doesn't feel like a compelling enough detail to have been one of the few direct clues Scott has ever given us. What would be compelling is this. The toy animatronic designs, or however they were actually referred to in universe, already existed as of 1983. And now I realize that this might sound outlandish, but bear with me. I have plenty of evidence to back this up. You might notice that some of this evidence is from games that came later in the series, but I don't think this was the retcon. This would have been perfectly reasonable to conclude at the time, and would have had a similar level of evidence to other early FNaF theories. Our first encounter with the toy animatronics came in FNaF 2, where we're introduced to a truly colorful cast. Literally. We have Toy Freddy, Bonnie and Chica, Mangle, the Puppet, and Balloon Boy. The Night One phone call stresses that the animatronics are new, expensive, and equipped with facial recognition software tied into a criminal database. This all sounds fine. It's the Night 3 phone call that doesn't really mesh here. The way Phone Guy talks about the kid-friendly Foxy redesign sounds like it happened a long time ago. Give it a listen.
Did Foxy ever appear in the hallway? Probably not. I was just curious. Like I said, he was always my favorite. They tried to remake Foxy, you know? They thought the first one was too scary, so they redesigned him to be more kid-friendly and put him in Kids Cove to keep the toddlers entertained, you know. But kids these days just can't keep their hands to themselves. The staff literally had to put Foxy back together at the end of every shift. Eventually, they just stopped trying and left him as some kind of take-apart, put-back-together attraction. Now he's just a mess of parts. I think the employees refer to him as just the Mangle.
Phone Guy uses some interesting language to describe how a kid-friendly Foxy design turned into Mangle, stating employees had to put Mangle back together at the end of every shift, and that they eventually just gave up in a location that's only been open a couple of weeks at best. It's also hard to mesh the idea that the animatronics have been around longer than the location when the Night One phone call makes it clear that these are new, state-of-the-art animatronics designed for this location. That time frame I gave the FNaF 2 restaurant isn't a guess either. It's made abundantly clear throughout the game. Phone Guy mentions the new, modern design of the building and really stresses how expensive it was to bring in these new animatronics. At the end of the game, we're also greeted with this newspaper clipping that states the location was only open for a few short weeks. I'm calling special attention to Mangle for more reasons than just the odd description of their backstory. What sparked this video was the call-out of Toy Chica's missing beak in the FNaF 4 minigames. But these aren't the only toys we see in those games. In the Crying Child's very own house, we see this, a toy Mangle taken apart on a child's bedroom floor. How would this get here? It clearly has animatronic parts and pieces. This was definitely designed to have this feature of being taken apart and put back together. But this is in 1983. FNaF 2 doesn't take place until 1987. How would the designers of the toy know to make Mangle a take-apart and put-back-together toy, complete with animatronic endoskeleton pieces, unless the events Phone Guy described had already happened? How would this have already happened if the toy animatronics won't be built until 1987? Am I calling Phone Guy a liar? No, I'm not. At least not about this. I do believe the animatronics we see in FNaF 2 are new animatronics, but I don't believe they're new character designs. I think they were carried over from something much older. Fallfest. Don't worry, I know what you're thinking. There's no way Fallfest was a concept all the way back in FNaF 4. And you're right. I don't think it was. I do think the idea of the brand and characters having roots in a carnival or circus-styled attraction was. In the same year as FNaF 4's release, we also got The Silver Eyes, in which Henry is stated to have, alongside other informational books, tools, blueprints, and the like, a book on carnivals and circuses. The next game also introduced some decidedly circus-themed animatronics, and looking at the Rockstar animatronics after those, which would have been Henry's design, they're quite similar to the designs of the toy animatronic lineup as well. The first hint of a full festival, carnival, circus, etc. that comes to mind, aside from Circus Baby's entire existence, are these posters that can appear in Pizza Sim. There are advertisements for an October Spookfest, as well as a poster showing clowns, a bear, and a ventriloquist dummy. I understand that this one might simply be referring to Afton family dynamics, but the Spookfest poster can't be explained away so easily. Why would this be one of the alternative alleyway decorations that can appear alongside other, decidedly lore-relevant images? The evidence for it specifically being Fallfest comes after these games. Now, I didn't get to play AR, and there's not a huge amount of resources on it, but I'll give it an honorable mention to point out that it had a Dark Circus DLC, even though I don't personally know much more about it. If you got to play it, please drop a comment with any info you remember that may help to prove or disprove this theory. After the release of the first Help Wanted, we began to see more allusions to this fall festival, including giving it a name. This is the point where it becomes appropriate to say we knew what to call it. The Curse of Dreadbear DLC lobby is modeled after Fallfest 83. Like other Steelwool games, there are a lot of little details to look at, so there's no way I could cover every one of them and still have this video be a reasonable length. This DLC introduced Dreadbear and Grim Foxy to round out a band that includes Jacko variants of Bonnie and Chica. At the time, it didn't feel like it was taken very seriously by a lot of the community. Without much to connect it to, and having never heard of a Fallfest before, the idea was overshadowed by the other pieces of lore that pointed forward in the series. However, a lot of the things we see in Curse of Dreadbear are brought over to Security Breach in the form of not just these cutouts, but also direct copies of rooms from the minigames. Speaking of Security Breach, do you remember that one weird merch drop from Funko that was Security Breach branded? What was it called again? Oh yeah, Balloon Circus. I mean, look at these guys. These aren't the only hints we got from Security Breach either. In the files of the Ruin DLC, we can find an unused, unfinished map with this text. Something cool that maybe foreshadows Carnival, pending J-Top's thoughts. So from what we know, they were working on something internally referred to as Carnival. We've seen them use codenames like this before. Namely, Security Breach was called Quarters, and Ruin was called Chowda. A key point to be mentioned is that in those two cases, the files for the project were named after the codename. This is why I don't think Carnival refers to Help Wanted 2. Help Wanted 2's files were under the name Thumper. We also saw the return of Balloon Boy in Security Breach. Featured in his own playable arcade game, he is heavily associated with carnival and circus imagery. He also looks like something that one might find in a circus handing out balloons to kids. So we see one of the animatronics from the FNaF 2 location being directly associated with this imagery. Balloon Boy returns again in Help Wanted 2. He's featured on the carousel, which appears to take place at Fallfest. We can tell because it features the hay bale and pumpkin beside the player and a few familiar silhouettes in the distance. Silhouettes that call back to Curse of Dreadbear. It is, notably, one of the attractions to catch fire, and even shows the fire starting at the old barn before working its way to the carousel. Balloon Boy, as one would expect, isn't the only character found on that carousel. He shares the attraction with a wide range of other animatronics. Well, not that wide of a range. It's the classics and the toys. The classics, according to the phone guy in FNaF 1, are around 20 years old. If that game really does take place in the early 90s, then that means the classic animatronics came into existence in the early 70s. Under previous interpretations of events, this already didn't make any sense, and when the Faz token showed up in Security Breach, it felt like an impossibility. If we take my theory into account and assign the origin of these animatronics to Fallfest, especially a relatively early year of Fallfest, things begin to fall into place. Not just this one line from FNaF 1, but other things as well, like Mangle. The Carousel's iteration of Foxy has been labeled as Funtime Foxy by a number of people who talk about this game online. I don't think that's who this is. I think this is Mangle. Compare it to this picture of Funtime Foxy. Take a look at the parts of the face that are colored pink, the deep red cheeks and lips, and the color of the bow tie. You'll also notice the iconic Foxy hook. All of these are details that Funtime Foxy lacks. But if you take a look at Mangle, you'll notice how the details here match up much better than those on Funtime Foxy. There's no mistake. This is an unmangled version of Mangle. It's almost like, when the carousel was designed, the branding hadn't changed to reflect this animatronic's fate. If this Foxy variant originated at Fallfest, that gives ample time for Mangle's origin story to occur. This already feels like a really compelling theory, and around, 10 minutes in to basically just listing facts at you, I still have more evidence. This poster in the background of Help Wanted 2's Cupcake Bonanza machine. That's right, this prize capsule machine actually has a name. This came as a shock to the people who joined us to play Questionable Conjecture on our Tuesday game night livestream. If you want the opportunity to join in on the fun for our next game night, click the link in the description to join our Discord server. While you're down there, would you mind hitting that like and subscribe button? It only takes a second, but that extra interaction helps out a ton, especially for smaller channels. The Help Wanted 2 Fallfest poster shows some older, cartoonish designs of the Core 4 band, with Freddy, Bonnie, and Chica performing on stage under a Fallfest banner, while Foxy stares at the cupcake, menacingly. The art features pumpkins and takes place in what I can only assume is a cornfield. There's an interesting component to this piece that I'm yet to point out, which obviously means it's the most important, right? The puppet, iconic tear streaks and all, posted like a scarecrow in the background of this Fallfest poster. Where else do we see the puppet? In the FNaF 2 location, alongside Balloon Boy and the toy animatronics. In the Night 2 phone call, Phone Guy even says this.
I'll be honest, I never liked that puppet thing. It's always thinking, and it can go anywhere.
Implying that the puppet has been around a lot longer than a couple of weeks. That's not actually the most important part of this poster, in my opinion, but this is where things get a little bit more meta. In November of 2021, Lady Fizzy posted this image on the Five Nights at Freddy's subreddit. It appears to be concept art for specifically a version of the toy animatronics, but these aren't the sleek, modern animatronics we saw in FNaF 2. These look older, more similar to the shape depicted on the poster. You may notice that Foxy is missing from this lineup, and I can't imagine it's because they've been excluded. I just think that she wasn't allowed to release the art of Foxy that went alongside them because it would have given far too much away. At first, I thought this concept art was just simple mascot suits designed for people because of how the fur material seems to fold and drape like cloth. But upon closer inspection, this sketch of Chica reveals a pink endoskeleton head, while this version opens to reveal an empty suit. Are these Springlock suits? Or are they the suits mentioned in the books that could be placed onto and removed from endoskeletons? Either way, they appear older and more likely to be climbed into than their modern counterparts. But whether they were worn as suits isn't the main point of this video. The evidence for the toys' designs existing alongside that of the classics at Fallfest is overwhelming, and looking at the series through this lens clears up a lot of the issues we faced with what felt like inconsistencies. Do I think Fallfest specifically was planned from the very beginning? Absolutely not. Do I think Scott might have had the vague idea of the characters originating at some kind of carnival or circus-styled festival that then met a bitter end? Sure, that's not at all impossible. I'd say it's even likely that he had the vague idea of an origin story floating around in his head. As someone who does a decent amount of writing and world building as a hobby, I know that there are often vague details and ideas that are still a part of a story without actually making it into that story. So here's what I think happened. It's Fallfest in the early 70s. Everything is going well, the place is popular, and they decide to introduce some animatronic mascots. These may have been just Indos that could wear mascot suits or some other design. But the point is that we now have animatronic characters at the attraction. A technological marvel at the time, and a huge hit with the somewhat older crowd. But there was a problem. Robots move differently to humans. And while people in mascot suits could use subtle body language cues to appear less threatening to small children, these animatronics followed pre-programmed movement patterns. Little kids who didn't quite understand what was happening were afraid of them, especially Foxy, as he was already characterized as more morally gray than the main band. Obviously, all the little kids being afraid of your main attraction isn't great for business, so they came up with a special, kid-friendly design, using bright colors and movement patterns that were more appropriate for small children. They stationed these kiddie versions of the animatronics, as one would expect, in the area with all the little kid games and rides. Kids Cove. Here, they became associated with Balloon Boy, the animatronic designed to distribute balloons to children. The kids loved this new version of the animatronic band, especially the new, friendlier variation of Foxy. Climbing and pulling on them, as children do, these animatronics suffered damage pretty often, but Foxy got the worst of it. Every night when the employees would clean up the area and reset it for the next day, Foxy had to be almost completely reassembled. Eventually, the employees just gave up. If the kids wanted their Foxy to be a broken, mangled version of itself, that's what they'd get. The mangle. This take apart and put back together attraction was a huge hit, and so the branding adapted to reflect that. This new aspect of Foxy was advertised publicly, and became so ingrained in the animatronics' identity that when toys were made of them later on, they had to include animatronic parts that kids could disassemble and change, just like they were used to doing with the original character. Even in 1987, years after Fallfest burned down, this aspect of the kid-friendly Foxy was remembered. When they built modern versions of these characters, they kept the theme. While the other three were performing on stage, the Mangle was being treated like a glorified Mr. Potato Head. We can't know for sure how popular this would have been in the late 80s due to how quickly the new restaurant shut down, but one thing's for sure, Toy Foxy would forever be remembered as the Mangle. If you liked this video, please remember to hit like and share your thoughts in the comments. Whether you agree or disagree, I'd love to see what you have to say. With that said, I'd like to say thank you to my channel members, Bullsfrog and Embrisk. I'll see you guys in the next one,
and have a fazerific day!